Most people in the 41st millennium fear death, but there are fates in this galaxy far worse than dying. Imagine a nightmare from which you can never wake, where pain never ends, and hope itself is just another tool used to break you. That is the reality of those taken by the Dark Eldar. Tonight, you will hear their story, not the tale of heroes or martyrs, but of souls trapped in horror beyond any battlefield. In Warhammer's Endless Night, true terror isn't dying. It's knowing you're wanted alive by something far worse than death. They called it a forward operating post, but it was nothing more than a battered bunker on the edge of forgotten space. My name was Carrion Voss, and before everything changed, I was a guardsman of the 47th Cadian, posted on the fringes of the webway. We thought we had seen it all: orcs, tyrannids, even the cults of chaos, each bringing their own flavor of fear. But that night, under the faded light of a binary moon, all our hard-learned bravado counted for nothing. It started with silence. Not the quiet after a firefight, not the hush of soldiers waiting for orders, but a suffocating stillness that crept through the walls and made the air thick as engine oil. We joked about it at first, as soldiers do, passing ration packs around under flickering lamps. Someone told an old story about the Drukhari, what the Outlanders called the Dark Eldar, a shadow race lurking at the edges of reality, hunting not for war, but for prey. We heard the stories, of course. Everyone on the fringe did. Pirates who vanished without a trace, convoys left with every living soul missing but no bodies found, only the stink of terror lingering in the ship corridors. But stories are one thing. The cold, creeping certainty that you might be next, that's something entirely different. Sometime before midnight, the wind outside our compound began to whistle in a way it never had before, slicing through the gaps in the plasteel as if it were alive. The auspexes reported nothing, no thermal signatures, no movement. Our Vox operator punched into command, but static answered him. One by one, normality peeled itself away, leaving only dread. I stared out at the wasteland, hands gripping my lasgun tight enough to make my knuckles ache. I tried to remember the faces of my squad. Jarrell, who laughed too loud. Elias, always sharpening his blade. Sergeant Mirren, never flinching. We were alive, breathing, strong. But in that frozen air, it felt like death was already here, just out of sight, watching for a moment to strike. It wasn't war drums that warned us. It wasn't the panic of an all-out assault. Our destruction began with nothing at all. A stillness, a silence, then shadows that moved where no light should cast them. I told myself we were ready for anything. But as the first screams broke out in the southern bay, I realized we were never ready for them. And so the first night of our nightmare began. Not with a battle, but with the world being quietly stolen out from under our feet. You've prepared for every enemy: orcs, chaos, tyrannids, but there's no training for the silence before a Dark Eldar strike. Hours after the first scream echoed among the metal corridors, we learned what it means to be truly alone. Communications were dead. No reinforcements would come. The soft blue moon outside cast shadows that looked somehow sharper, more alive. The entire compound felt shrink-wrapped in dread. I huddled behind a battered coil of ammunition crates, heart pounding like a drum. Those of left alive stared at every movement, flinched at the slightest noise. But the horror of the Drukhari is not in how they attack, it's in how they arrive. There were no shouts, no warning shots, no wild charge at our fortifications. Instead, the shadows themselves began to move. Private Jarrell whispered that he saw something in the corner of the mess hall, a blur brushing past without leaving footprints, a blade gleaming for an instant and then gone. Sergeant Mirren hissed for silence. In a real battle, you can measure your odds. With these predators, odds are irrelevant. We moved in pairs, clutching our weapons, watching the corners, yet the fear was that you would simply disappear. I heard Elias mumbling prayers under his breath, the kind that sound less like faith and more like bargaining with fate. One by one, squad after squad reported missing men, but no blood, no sign of a struggle. Only empty space, quiet, chilling, final. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw something moving against the distant bulkheads. Tall figures, cloaked in armor that drank in every photon, gliding along the ceiling. Their eyes, burning faintly violet, looked down and through you. Then, as if the night itself flexed, all was quiet again. The worst part? You never see who takes you. There's no fight, just a sudden sharp pain, and then darkness. The Drakari collect their prey with perfect patience, snatching bodies like toys left too close to midnight. No alarms, no heroics, just the knowledge that piece by piece, the world you trust is being stolen away, and you might be next. As the hours dragged on, the few of us remaining held tighter to our weapons. Fate would not be negotiated, and bravery meant little against the silence. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to remember what fear felt like before tonight. The shadows grew deeper, and from somewhere inside them, I knew the Dark Eldar were watching. Predators always leave a trace, except for the Dark Eldar. When they come, you're already too late, and you're already theirs. The wind outside was now thick with the scent of ozone and fear, a mixture only those who face the abyss recognize. It was strange how we all tried not to speak each other's names out loud, as if the Dark Eldar hunted by sound. Maybe we were already hoping not to be remembered, a feeble superstition that being anonymous might save us. I moved through smoke-filled corridors, lasgun ready, listening for anything except that dreadful silence. Every door in the outpost had become a promise of danger. Every corner felt haunted by a presence just out of sight, a cold, voiceless intelligence. Then, without warning, everything stopped. No wind, no breath, not even the hum of the ancient power cells that ran our compound. The air grew sharp, biting, and full of static electricity. My skin prickled with terror as an unnatural cold pressed in from all sides. And then I saw it. The shadow that wasn't a shadow near the east airlock, a ripple in reality as if the universe itself was tearing to let something in. Before I could speak, before I could even call for help, I was yanked off my feet. A hand, bone-thin, clawed, impossibly strong, closed around my throat. I couldn't scream. Purple eyes stared into mine, faceless and mocking. There was no emotion, no joy, no rage, just hunger, clinical, patient, hopelessly inhuman. Around me, other crewmates were snatched in total silence. Some tried to fight, others were paralyzed by fear. All fell the same way, with no glory, no hero's last stand, just the humiliation of being prey. I heard Jarrell somewhere on the deck above, his voice rising and then cut short, as if a switch had been flipped. Gone. Erased. The Dark Eldar melted back into the walls, clutching their captives. Only the echo of footsteps, never hurried, never loud, remained. I was left in the hands of my captor, feeling my consciousness flicker at the edges as the world narrowed to two things: cold metal and eyes that reflected only the void. This is not war, I realized. This is sport. And we are not soldiers, we're trophies. A prison in the void, no light, only iron rails and alien laughter. Are you their captive, or just part of their game? I awoke, uncertain how much time had passed. My mouth was dry, and my wrists ached from restraints colder than any steel I'd ever known. Light did not exist in this place, if you could even call it a place. I was crammed inside a cold compartment, lined with alien metal etched in symbols I couldn't understand. Every few minutes, if minutes even meant anything anymore, there was a sound above me, a distant, almost musical clang. It was laughter, I think, but warped and cruel, echoing on forever through the bowels of the ship. We were packed tight, not dead, not free, but held as if waiting to be judged. I whispered to the prisoner beside me, hoping for the comfort of another human voice. His reply was hoarse, broken, like he'd spent a lifetime screaming. "We're on a homunculus barge," he said, voice trembling. "Not a cell, not a camp. This is entertainment for them." From somewhere further away came a hollow wail, part pain, part amusement, and all despair. The Dark Eldar had built this ship as a labyrinth. There were no doors, no windows, only grates in the walls that let in the sounds of suffering. My skin crawled. The air was thick with rancid, sweet chemical stench that burned my nose and numbed my senses. I tried not to breathe, but there was no escaping it. Sometimes the compartments would shift, jolt, and wrench the bodies within, as if the vessel itself was alive and enjoying our misery. Occasionally, one of them would walk by, a figure of obsidian armor etched with silver filigree, helmeted and arrogant, gliding just beyond the bars. Their gaze lingered, drinking in our terror as if savoring fine wine. They said nothing. Why would they? In this place, words were wasted. I began the endless counting breaths, heartbeats, anything to anchor myself to reality. But reality was melting, replaced by the certainty that there was no escape. Are you a prisoner here, or just another piece of their twisted amusement? in the dark of the void, the answer hardly matters. The first thing they take, not your life, but your choices, and once that's gone, hope falls apart, thread by thread. It's easy to think survival is a matter of strength, of keeping your body alive, but the Dark Eldar knew better. To them, weakness was not in flesh, it was in hope. They controlled everything. When we breathed, when we drank, when we slept, always by rules set with arbitrary cruelty. Meals, if you could call them that, arrived unscheduled, a tasteless, viscous slurry dumped from the ceiling by unseen mechanisms. Water came only in trickles, just enough to stave off death. Every deprivation was purposeful, not to kill us, but to strip us of any belief we still shaped our own fate. No one could move freely. I watched a prisoner, once a planetary enforcer by his badge, try to stand and challenge a guard for his rations. The response was silent. A twist of pain so precisely applied, the man didn't even scream. He simply collapsed, dignity dissolving in the eyes of his captors. Out in the corridor, the Dark Eldar would stare through atomized glass at our compartment, watching us make our pitiful bargains. Some tried to ration scraps, others bartered secrets for an extra sip of water. The cruelty was not only in their actions, but in the invisible lines they marked between us. Who would be fed, who would be ignored, who might be chosen next? It was a design, an experiment. We were not prisoners. We were puppets on their stage. Sometimes, the cell would shift angles, dumping us against the wall in heaps, humiliation layered atop hunger. Every groan and struggle only made them more entertained, their faces hidden behind sculpted masks, their laughter warped by intercom lines. I began to understand. Control was the real cruelty here. When your choices are gone, when you cannot even decide when to sleep or when to stand, you are no longer alive in any human sense. You are a thing, a shadow in someone else's nightmare. And that is exactly what the Dark Eldar wanted, to make every moment of your captivity a masterpiece of despair. Even nightmare has a leader. When you face their Dracon, you discover some monsters don't even need eyes or faces to haunt your soul. Days, or what felt like days, blurred inside that cell. Patterns of suffering repeated until even pain lost its edge. Then, on a cycle none of us could predict, the Dracon appeared. He arrived without warning, a mass of obsidian and chrome, every movement precise like a predator who has already decided the outcome. His mask glimmered pitch black, with narrow slits carved where eyes should be, but beneath there was emptiness, not flesh. The Dracon's voice echoed through the framework, deep, melodic, yet utterly cold. All things must serve. That was his greeting. Whenever he entered, shadows seemed to gather. The ordinary guards, the ones who sometimes mocked us for amusement, fell silent, deferential to the master of ceremonies. He did not inflict pain in the common way. Instead, he circled us, his gloved hands trailing lasers of energy along the bars. In a single motion, he would choose a victim, sometimes through nothing more than a glance or perhaps a calculation based on who showed hope. Those were his preferred subjects. Hope was delicious. I watched as a woman, once an Imperial medic, was drawn up and out, her screams slicing the stagnant air. The Dracon's ritual was clinical, careful in its preparation, creative in its cruelty. Sometimes he asked questions. Where does it hurt most? What do you fear losing? The answers were music to him. Others, like me, were left to simply witness. The Dracon's mask turned, lingering until you felt hollow. No threats were spoken, but in the depth of his gaze, those blank sockets was a promise. When he was done with you, you would never forget him, if you survived. He wanted to see us unravel. That was his art. His power wasn't just in his command, but in his presence, a black star that warped reality. Even when he left, agony and terror hung like thick fog, and his laughter echoed through the steel corridors long after, each note tuned to some deeper misery. In facing the Dracon, we learned that true monsters might never even touch you, and still leave scars that last forever. Pain is an art, and for the Dark Eldar, your body is their canvas, a masterpiece the galaxy never sees. There is a difference between pain given in war and the pain created by artists of agony. The Dark Eldar never rush their performance. Every cut, every sound, every tear of flesh has meaning, an intention behind the torment. It began with the selection. The Dracon's attendants, slight and ghost-like, drifted among us with trays of shining alien instruments. Knives, needles, coils that writhed with unnatural blue light, tools made for precision, for spectacle. I was chosen once. The memory stings sharper than any wound. Hands, cold and elegant, drew me from the cell. No words, just the music of my heart racing. I was pinned to a slab, the room lit with violet radiance. A dozen dark Eldar watched, their faces concealed, waiting for the ritual to begin. They started at my skin, cutting along lines and patterns that were almost beautiful. The wounds were shallow but endless, designed not for death, but for suffering, drawing colors from my body that I'd never seen before. They studied my reactions, the flinch, the gasp, the tears. One leaned close and whispered, "Pain is pleasure, but only for those who know how to savor it." I understood then. My agony was their art. Other prisoners watched, sometimes forced to participate, made to wound each other or bear witness. The room was filled with a mixture of sobs, laughter, and the soft click of blades. The Draken's voice cut through the chorus, praising skill and creativity as if judging a contest. When it was over, I was returned to my cell, less of myself than before. The scars would never heal. They were trophies not only for my captors, but reminders for me. I was alive, yes, but each breath was another brushstroke in an endless private masterpiece. And in this gallery of suffering, no one ever applauded, except the monsters who made it all. Survival is cruel. The worst wounds never heal, and the longer you last, the more they'll savor every scream. Surviving in the hands of the Dark Eldar is not about resilience. It is about endurance. How long you can last in a world designed to break you, not to kill you. The wounds I carried were nothing compared to the horror of their design. They closed up just enough to let the torture begin again within hours. Infection wasn't allowed. Healers with tools more terrible than any scalpel and syringes filled with shimmering green fluid kept us just healthy enough for another session. No comfort, no healing, just the certainty of more pain. You begin to count your screams. You lose track of days, but never of the times you beg for mercy. They relish each moment. Every plea, every cry, every gasp is cataloged, remembered, replayed, used later as reference. Pain becomes a language, and you are forced to speak it fluently. Once, a prisoner beside me, a preacher who'd lost his faith, asked why we could not simply die. I had no answer for him. It is not allowed here. Death is a privilege, not a punishment. The Dark Eldar have perfected the art of keeping bodies alive through everything. You may faint, but you'll awaken to the same agony. You may try to starve, but they will feed you. You may even attempt to take your own life, only to find their medicine prevents it. All that remains is the dull rhythm of suffering, pulsing through nerves too fatigued to react. I learned not to scream, not because I found any strength, but because saving your voice for later is the only power left. But there is no victory in endurance here. The survivors are the true losers. The longer you last, the more inventive the Dark Eldar become, savoring every new note in your aria of pain. And so, surviving is nothing but a sentence. Every day, an invitation to greater horrors. Memories are precious, until they weaponize yours into nightmare fuel, where every ounce of hope becomes another blade. There is torture that maims the body, and then there is torture that corrupts the soul. The Dark Eldar understand both, but their greatest pleasure is in turning your happiest memories into instruments of new suffering. One day, they came with a device. It resembled a crown of wires and needles, each tip sizzling with violet energy. I was pinned to a chair, forced to stare into the face of a Drukhari warlock whose smile promised horrors I could not yet imagine. The needles slid into the soft spots at my temples, flooding my thoughts with clarity sharper than any pain. The warlock whispered, smooth as silk and just as cold, "Remember your family. Remember laughter. Remember love." And I did. For a brief, blinding moment, I saw my sister's face, the sunlight on Cadian soil, the taste of sweet water after a long march. But as quickly as comfort brushed against my mind, the darkness returned, twisting each tenderness into agony. Scenes of my childhood were overlaid with screams. Every friend's voice was warped to cries for help. Every moment of joy soured into regret. The machine was a painter, and my memories its palette. The warlock layered colors of pain over every image. A mother's gentle touch became the cut of a blade. A lover's embrace transformed into the suffocating grip of chains. I could not choose what to remember anymore. They made me relive the worst day of my life on a loop until I begged to forget even my own name. Other prisoners were not spared. Some emerged babbling in broken songs, faces slick with tears. Some never spoke again at all. When the torture was over, they left me shaking, emptied of hope. The past, once my only refuge, now hurt as badly as the present. And I understood. When the Drukhari are done with your body, they come for your mind. When they have broken your mind, what else is left? Only the certainty that tomorrow, the pain will follow you everywhere, even into your dreams. You're put on display, a show for shadows. The applause is real, but so is your agony. The Dark Eldar do not keep their suffering hidden. They parade it, savoring every detail before an audience that revels in despair. Surviving torture is no victory, because inevitably, they want more. They want a performance. One by one, prisoners are dragged from cells and chained upon a stage, a platform battered, stained, designed for spectacle. There are crowds beyond the bars, dozens of Drukhari, cloaked in shimmering silks and armored carapace, faces masked and eyes fever bright, gathered for the entertainment of watching us reduced to less than human. Spotlights, searing white, blue, and crimson, pin you in place, exposing every tremor and scar. The crowd waits in silent anticipation. Pain is not enough. Here it must be delivered dramatically. You are forced to act, stagger to your feet, crawl, plead, perform every moment of suffering for an audience that judges every gasp, every desperate attempt at dignity. They applauded when I fell. They cheered when I tried to rise, only to be smacked back down. Other prisoners were made to duel with their own pain, forced to fight each other and themselves for a chance, however slim at mercy. Some whispered prayers, others screamed until their voices broke. A few stood tall, refusing to yield, drawing jeers from their captors. These were the crowd's favorites, broken slowly and publicly. The show always ends the same way. You return to your cell emptier than before, physically spent and consumed by shame. You are no longer a person, only a spectacle, a story for them to relish, pass around, remember, and imitate. What does it feel like to be entertainment for the cruelest beings in the galaxy? To have your anguish be the centerpiece of their joy? It is the loneliest form of survival, and in the darkness that follows, you begin to wish the lights had never found you. The mind can shatter quietly. Technology drills deeper than pain. Some prisoners forget who they are, leaving only screams. After every performance, after every public humiliating agony, there comes a new level of cruelty, one that goes beyond the body and aims to unravel the mind itself. The Dark Eldar are not without science, and for them, torture is a field ripe for innovation. Guards arrived one evening with devices unlike any weapon I'd seen before. Sleek, curved implants and glass vials filled with shimmering liquid. Those chosen were escorted into a chamber bathed in pale blue light, a place less for suffering and more for study. Inside, they attached cold metal to my skull, running wires and needles across my scalp. I heard a faint hum like music played through broken bones. A mask descended onto my face, filling my vision with colors and flickering memories. Voices, sometimes my own, sometimes not, began to swirl in my mind. The world split and folded, memory and fantasy entwined into a tapestry of horror. They were not content with pain. They wanted to see how far the mind could stretch before it snapped. Scanners mapped my thoughts, replaying moments of terror as if they were films. I sobbed for mercy, not sure if the words even left my lips. They laughed, noting my confusion, recording each twitch and tremor. The room was filled with prisoners suffering at different speeds. Some babbling nonsense, speaking to invisible ghosts. Others reduced to silence, eyes vacant and glazed. With each new experiment, personalities became smeared into shreds. A man beside me lost his name, forgot that he was ever human. A medic recited data as if she were an automaton, face blank, soul gone. Every new session left me stripped further. I tried to remember who I was, clinging to small details, like the color of home, the taste of real food. But the more they drilled into my mind, the harder it became. Pain was easy to understand, but this loss of self was the worst torture yet, and still screams pierced the walls, echoing from those who could not keep anything left inside. Your suffering is currency here. With every cry, you buy one more moment alive, one more thrill for your captors. By the 12th cycle, it became clear pain was more than a pastime for the Dark Eldar. It was how they counted time, how they managed and measured the worth of every prisoner. The cells were like markets, every whimper and scream a coin traded in between the shadows. I noticed how the guards kept track, Some wore bands marked with glowing symbols, tallying every outburst, every breakdown, every moment a prisoner surrendered pride for the lowest form of mercy. Sometimes they would reward the noisiest among us, granting rations or water with a smirk, inviting more displays of agony. The risk was simple. Express too little pain and you starved. Beg too often or too convincingly and the games changed. The rewards turned to punishments, the attention to cruelty. A fellow prisoner, once an invoker in a cathedral choir, survived by perfecting her performance of desperation. She learned to scream just enough, to sob at the perfect pitch, earning water and keeping the guards entertained. I envied her strategy even as I knew it was destroying her. But it wasn't just a market. It was an auction, and sometimes the highest bidder lost everything. Those who screamed the loudest, who broke the most visibly, became favorites, chosen for the special chambers, experiments worse than anything we'd seen before. We traded secrets for crumbs, smiles for hope, dignity for another day. All the while, the Drukhari watched, collecting stories and emotions like rare jewels, cataloging our destruction for future amusement. It struck me. In this place, survival is not strength, it's a business. Pain is the coin. And in the end, every currency becomes worthless, except for the thrill it gives those who spend it. The air itself is poison. Unnatural energies warp flesh and bone. You watch as friends twist and break alongside you. It was not enough for the Drukhari to torment us with knives and noise. They twisted the world around us, poisoning the very air we breathed. Day by day, the faint hum of their machines filled the cell with energy, something you could taste on your tongue, metallic and sharp. The first to fall was a young scribe. His skin began to ripple with strange colors. Veins stood out like cables, and he clawed at his face, muttering about unseen lights and cold voices. A healer tried to help, only to watch her own hands blister and burn. There was no reason, no science, just a flood of power that changed flesh and bone at random. The Dark Eldar infused madness into every breath, warping minds and bodies for their amusement. Some prisoners lost hair and teeth, others contorted until bones cracked and eyes bled. The stench of sickness mingled with the scent of fear. Laughter echoed from guards who watched the shapes of suffering bloom, delighted at every new grotesque transformation. You learned to endure only so much. The air made me weak, my muscles hurting with every movement. Sometimes I wondered if my thoughts were my own, or if something alien was already crawling behind my eyes. I saw a preacher gasp his last breath, his words melting away as his body withered to bone. There was no sanctuary. Hope became a desperate myth. We were not only prisoners, we were subjects, living canvases for their art of horror. And in the choking murk of each new day, survival meant watching friends become monsters and praying that your time would come quickly or never at all. Pain becomes a companion, the only voice that answers back. You bargain with agony, searching for a shred of meaning. When every other comfort is stripped away, when your world shrinks to a cell and a heartbeat, even pain becomes familiar. It is the only constant, the one thing the Drukhari never take away. I spoke to my pain as if it were an old friend, whispering to it in the dark. Sometimes I begged it to ease, sometimes I cursed it. But always I listened. Pain became my teacher, my boundary, the voice telling me that I was still barely alive. Other prisoners retreated into their own rituals. I saw a former officer trace invisible patterns on the wall, counting his breaths and wounds, each mark an attempt to organize the chaos. A scribe muttered stories from home, weaving agony into nursery rhymes, as if softening the ache would make it smaller. There were moments in the deepest night when I almost heard my pain speak back. It told me not to hope for rescue, not to expect kindness. But it also reminded me, as long as I felt pain, I was defying the Drukhari. They had not yet turned me to ash, nor made me nothing. In this twisted logic, suffering became resistance. I could not fight them with fists or prayers, but I could grit my teeth and hold on to myself, even if only through the sharp edge of torment. Each day I survived became a small, stubborn victory. I was not just a subject. I was still there, somewhere beneath the agony. And if pain was my only company, I would not let the Drukhari silence it. Not yet. Sometimes the soul breaks first. Others endure, holding on to scraps of dignity. Either way, victory and defeat taste the same in the end. By the 15th cycle, most of us were ghosts. You could see it in the hollow eyes, the staggered steps, the way bodies moved without purpose or memory. There were those who surrendered to despair, to madness, to emptiness. There were others who clung to something smaller, quieter, a song, a secret, a single name. These scraps of self became lifelines in the sea of agony. The Drukhari watched us choose, day after day. Some begged for death, others prayed for freedom. A rare few chose defiance, not in grand gestures or heroic escapes, but in silent resistance. Refusing to scream when cut, spitting words of home instead of cries, meeting masked eyes with a look that said, "You cannot have everything." Not everyone lasted. Bodies failed, wills broke, but in the end, the smallest victories mattered. A prisoner died clutching the last scrap of a letter from her child. Another refused to fight when told, kneeling in quiet refusal until his execution. Their dignity cost them dearly, but it could not be stolen. As I write, or as I remember these words, I realize that defeat and victory blurred into one shade. The price paid for every shred of self was immense, but the payment was made anyway. No tide of pain washed away the memory that we were human, even as monsters fashioned new horrors. And when the cycle ended, when the guards turned away and left us in shadows, there was nothing left to say. Only silence, but not emptiness. The last choice was always ours, and in that, even in this place, we carved out the barest space for hope. If this story shook you, if you heard the echo of your own struggle in these dark halls, join Echoes of the Imperium. Share your thoughts below. Tell us what hope means to you, what scrap of dignity you'd hold on to through the worst fate imaginable. Subscribe to battle the darkness with us and bring every hidden story into the light. Because in Warhammer, the greatest fight is not always outside, it's within.